Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. As she said, I'm Hannah Dior. I'm the Associate Director in the School of Communication at Virginia Tech. And in addition to my communication background, I also have an MPH and earned my CHES a few years ago. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me. My PhD is in communication and information, but my pandemic project was to finish my MPH, and I've been at Virginia Tech for 16 years. And my area of research and teaching is health communication related. And I really tread in the space where public relations and health communication overlap. So my students get a little bit of both. And so today we're going to talk about personal branding and media engagement. So our time together will be sort of split into three bits. So we're going to talk about establishing a personal brand, why you should do it, how you should do it, and we're going to look at the what's called the brand framework, which will help you put all of those bits together in a cohesive personal brand. And at the end of the webinar, in addition to the slides from today, you'll also get a little checklist to help you on your way. Then we'll talk about engaging professionally, particularly online, and then some tips for how to get media engagement for your work. Because whether you're a researcher or you're a practitioner in the field, there are going to be times when you want the people in your community to know what's going on. You'll want them to engage with you. And so we want to talk about some strategies that will help you do that in a way that's going to get you the results that you want. So we'll kick off by saying that there are a few things to keep in mind about personal branding. One is that your professional identity is not just your job, but you are in a field where the overlap is really high. So you might be a public health practitioner by day, but you probably live a lot of the public health principles that are encompassed in your job. One of the things, sometimes people say, well, why do I even need a personal brand? You do need social proof of your professional identity. More and more employers are looking at things like social media accounts or your presence on platforms like LinkedIn, or they want to know that you've done some professional work or that you're engaging in a professional networking or professional development like this. And so establishing a personal brand can be a way to communicate that information. And then the last bullet, which is something I incorporate into every presentation about communication, it's all about the receiver. So how you present your personal brand will vary slightly based on who your audience is. So are you presenting yourself to get a job? Are you presenting yourself to form a partnership in your community? Are you trying to engage clients or community members to participate in the programs that you provide? All of those approaches are going to be a little bit different. And sometimes when we talk about that, people say, well, if you're going to keep changing who you are, why have a professional brand? You're not really changing who you are. You're just highlighting different parts of yourself based on who's listening and who you want to engage with. So those are some things to keep in mind as we work through today. So, personal branding is intentional. Whether you know it or not, you actually already have a personal brand. It might not be what you want it to be, but it's out there and it exists. But it's important to be intentional because that gives you the most control over your personal brand. It will increase your visibility professionally. It builds your credibility with your professional reputation, and it will generate professional opportunities outside your job. So, for example, doing this webinar today is not really related to my job at all. It's just something that I like to do. And because I engaged with Delta Omega and responded to a call for panelists, we were able to make that happen. But I'm sure as folks were looking through the proposed panels, one of the things they looked at was all those things we just talked about, social proof, finding out things that I do professionally to see if I would be a good fit. So branding kind of has two parts, image and reputation. And so one of those things you have complete control over, and that is your image. So your image is what you say about you. It's how you dress, it's how you speak, it's how you choose to present yourself. And then reputation is what other people say about you when you're not around. And so those two things merge to create a personal brand. So if you're not being intentional with the image piece, then it might be really misaligned with the reputation piece. And for the most part, we want those two things to work together because that creates a more cohesive personal brand. So, a few tips, and then we're going to look through the brand framework together. So, when you create your personal brand, one of the best places to start is to think about one sentence you could come up with that says what you do and what you're all about. And the reason you should say it in one sentence is one, that's really easy to remember. It can be the basis of introducing yourself. And two, it needs to be that straightforward. If you make it really complicated, then it's going to be difficult to manage. Um, so for example, sometimes people say, well, what do you do? And in the context of my professor life, it's very straightforward what I do. But in my other professional life, what I do is I am a strategic thinker who uses helps organizations use communication to accomplish goals and objectives. So that is the one sentence I typically open with. Your personal brand should be authentic. So, whatever it is you say you do or say you're about should be backed up by action. When those two things are out of alignment, people will believe what you do versus what you say. Your personal brand should be consistent. Again, you might be presenting slightly different information based on the audience, but across the board, some of those major themes related to your personal brand should be consistent. So people should, if they see you in one context and see you in another, they should be like, yeah, it seems like these two things sort of go together. Your brand should represent integrity and ethics. I cannot stress enough to professionals of all kinds that the one thing you have is your professional reputation. And it can be really difficult to build a solid professional reputation, but it's really easy to lose and almost impossible to get back once you've lost it. So make sure that when you are making decisions as a professional, you're representing integrity and ethics. And of course, you don't stay the same person over time. So we want you to evolve mindfully. So you're going to change. Your job may change. Your professional focus may change. And so your personal brand needs to evolve as well. But big shifts in personal branding can feel really inauthentic and it can create more problems than it solves. So just be really mindful, especially when you're looking at your online presence and how it may have shifted over time. And you probably know people who were one person on the internet and suddenly one day they were a completely different person, and that feels really out of balance. So just be mindful about that. I want to pause here and ask if there are any questions before we get into the brand framework. Some of those questions might be answered by that, but any questions so far? All right. Well, the idea of personal branding is very nebulous. Whenever you tell somebody you need to create a personal brand, it's like, well, okay, but what do I actually do to make that happen? And so my friend and colleague, Dr. Stephanie Smith, came up with the brand framework, and a step-by-step process you can go through to uncover your personal brand because I think most of you know who you are, you know who you want to be professionally, but you might need help sort of getting that into a format that you can really talk about easily. And so going through this process will help you do that. So we're going to look through these things one by one. And so when we talk about personal branding or branding of any kind, it really rests on values and beliefs. And so the first step is figuring out what those are, articulating them. Recognition, so managing your reputation and your image, attributes, thinking about what you bring to the table, narrative, how do you tell all of this in a cohesive story, and then design, which is making it look really nice. And thankfully, there are many, many free and easy to use tools that can help you give your personal social media platforms or documents that you work on, websites, a really great professional look. So that is the brand framework. Those are the five things that we're going to talk about, and we'll just dive into those now. So it all starts with beliefs. So for all five of these things, we're going to talk about online and offline tips. And for those of you who may be students watching, you've met people who are one person on the internet and a completely different person when you meet them in real life. And I'm hoping for your sake that didn't happen to you in a roommate situation, because I've heard from my students that that does happen sometimes. So we want online you and offline you to really be very similar people. So for all five of these pieces of the brand framework, we're going to have tips for online and offline. So your online presence really uncovers your beliefs. You are telling people who you are, what you believe in, and what you value with every piece of content you engage with. What do you like? What do you comment on? What do you share? Um, the content and the tone of your own posts. What are you posting about? Is telling people what you value and what you care about. And so the additive effect of your online presence really defines those beliefs in an online format. So people typically are not judging you by one post, but they're going to look at the totality of everything you've posted and get a sense of who you are. Offline, we really show people what our beliefs are by how we use our time, how we treat people, the causes and issues that we talk about, that we fundraise for, that we make sure people are aware of, and then the values and beliefs that really guide our decision making. You know, if we say that we believe in or we value fairness, that should be evident in how we make decisions. So if I think that things should be fair, I should be making decisions in a way that reflect fairness. So again, branding is all about walking the talk. So if we don't do those two things, we're going to have problems. So it all starts with beliefs. So if you look back over your own social media accounts, for example, are all of the things that you've engaged with, do you really think they reflect who you are or who you want to be? Or are there some things in there that maybe shouldn't be in there? One of the things too that we didn't say before, but I will say here, and I think when we get to the next section about engaging professionally, I do really recommend separating professional you online from personal you. For example, my Facebook account is pretty private. I don't really add people that I work with unless we're also colleagues and friends. I definitely don't add students on Facebook. It's primarily where I engage interpersonally with family and friends. On LinkedIn, though, come one, come all. I've, friend people who I may not even know in real life, but we have similar interests or teach in the same area. I definitely add friends on LinkedIn. So that is where I engage professionally. So I do really recommend that you don't have to have a personal and professional account on every platform, but when you're thinking about the account overall, the content should make it clear that this is for work or this is for more interpersonal family friends type things. And we'll come back to that. So it all starts with beliefs. So we can take a little inventory and see what if somebody were looking at this for the first time, what would they think I really believe in? Recognition is about visibility. So, one of the ways that we manage our image is by thinking about what is visible to other people. So, online, it's whatever shows up when somebody searches for you. You should be doing that regularly. Google yourself and see what comes up. Um, your profiles in all of your platforms, and that includes not just the posts that you have, but the photos and the biographies as well, should all be really well aligned. And any information that is visible about you online, whether that's your work, your hobbies, or your interests, think about what that is reflecting back to the viewer. Offline, this comes to us in the form of what people say about you. So, when people Google you, the content is speaking for you. It's not you speaking for yourself. So, the real life equivalent of that is somebody asking somebody else, like, hey, what do you know about Susie over here? It's how people describe you. What are the key words that people would say when a colleague or a new boss says, "I've just met this person, so tell me what you think about them." Your reputation as a collaborator. So, not just about you, the individual, and the work that you do, but are you a good teammate? Are you a good person to work with? Um, and then first impressions. We hear all the time that these are really critical because they sort of set the bar for who you are, and they can be difficult to overcome if you don't make a good first impression. So, thinking about what you want to say when you meet somebody for the first time, and we have some more information about that a little later on. The A in the brand framework is all about attributes. So, this is about your strengths, what you bring to the table. So, this is really your value proposition if we think about it in marketing terms. So, online, it's showcasing your skills and your strengths. If you think about LinkedIn, there's a whole section about skills and strengths, and people can endorse you for that. So, they can basically tag on and say, "Yes, I agree that this person is a great writer." The work examples that you share, people very often will want to see your work before they decide to work with you. Online, you have total control over how you describe yourself in your online platform, so be thoughtful about that. And then endorsements and recommendations. So, who are you promoting and amplifying? Who are you saying people need to be aware of or in tune with? And bearing in mind that when you endorse somebody or you recommend somebody, you're actually sort of hitching up to their reputation as well. And for any of you who have ever done any commercial communication work, you know how stressful that is whenever you're saying, "We want to partner with you." That partnership is really you saying, "We trust you enough to kind of hook our reputation up with yours." Offline, it's your skills and your strengths really come through in how you communicate in teams. So, how do you share your skills and strengths with the people you work with? What's your communication style like? Are you a little bit mean? Are you really nice? Are you laid back? Are you a doormat? All of those things come through, and people get a sense of who you are and what you're like to work with um, from your communication style. I know for those of you who are teachers, your students often have a very different idea of what your communication style is compared to what you think of. Um, I see there's one question in the chat, and I'm going to answer that when we get through this slide. What do people come to you for? Sometimes when you ask people, what are your skills and strengths? They're like, I really don't know. Like I think I'm pretty mediocre at everything, or I wouldn't want to say, I don't want to oversell it. Well, you can get to that answer by thinking about most often, what are people asking you to do? Are they asking you to write? Are they asking you to do some kind of graphic design? Are they asking you to help them analyze research results? Like, what do people ask you for assistance with? Because whatever those frequencies are, if people are constantly coming to you for X, Y, or Z, those are your skills and strengths. So, toot your own horn there. A lot of people are like, "Oh, I want to be humble." Don't be, especially if you're looking for a job. You need to definitely toot your own horn. So think about what your skills and strengths are and be ready to answer that question when people ask. And then your skills and your abilities definitely come through in how you handle challenges or difficult situations. Nobody likes strife or stress, and I get that. But sometimes if your butt is in a particular chair, it is your job to handle the challenges and the difficult situations. And so it's really important that you think about what your skills are around those situations because you know as well as I do, all the best planning in the world will not keep something from popping up. So, how do you handle those moments? Like being able to navigate those situations with calm and cool and efficiency is definitely a skill. So in the chat, Heather asked, where should we post examples of our work? LinkedIn or Instagram? Both of those can be really good options. LinkedIn is great. Instagram is good because you can create stories or carousels that show off, especially if you have some really good visual deliverables that you can show off. And I always tell people showing off your work is, it's rare that you do individual work. So sometimes when we work in teams, just brag about your team. Like, look at this great thing my team and I did together. It doesn't have to be super serious, but LinkedIn is great because that gives other people a sense of the work that you do and you're capable of. And Instagram is also good. I do share examples of my work on some of my interpersonal social media because the people that I know, my family and friends, also have jobs. And so sometimes I'm approached by family or friends to do things like this, like, oh, we would like to, my job would like to have you come and do a presentation. So I say anywhere you can really show off your work. If you are, if you're a consultant or if you're a faculty member, or if you're a student, you might collect your work in one place, like a personal website. There are a lot of good free websites like WordPress is one, or Wix, where you can kind of build out an online portfolio really easily. And it's a good place just to collect your work. So if somebody asks to see kind of a bigger chunk of your work, you can direct them to that website. And it's super easy to share that link like on an application or something, but anywhere you want really. But depending on who you're trying to connect with, LinkedIn and Instagram are both really good options for sharing your work. Good question. All right. So we're down to the last two bits of brand here. So the N in brand, oops, we went too far, stands for narrative. So this is how you tell your story. So online, you are telling that through your bio statements and your profile or any about section. If your job gives you the opportunity to write your own biography for the website, do it. Kevin in IT is just going to say your name and your job title. And my IT person's name is Kevin, so I'm not being mean-spirited, but they're not going to know what to say about you. So you need to say it about yourself. So take that opportunity. I know sometimes it can feel onerous to write those, but definitely take the opportunity to tell your own story on your company website. In the Q&A section, James says that he links his website for his work with research and in his company's social media. And the question is, should I share the same on personal social media with family and friends? Um, you can. I'm really lucky that I have a mom who is proud no matter what I do. Like this webinar, I think she's told everybody, and hardly anybody she knows really cares. But you never know where a lead for work will come from. And so you might not share it, you might not share everything that you do, but definitely share it with family and friends because you never know. And also in the area specifically of public health, you absolutely, as you note, could help them make decisions about, do I need a flu shot or how can I prevent falls in my home? Like your work could actually be, sharing important information to them. So that's a really good question. But yeah, share it with your family and friends for sure. Um, if you have family and friends who may not be receptive to the work that you do, that might be a consideration. I do have family members who are not pro public health, shall we say, but that's okay. They're nice enough not to make an issue out of it, but that might be a consideration too in sharing it with family and friends. So we're talking about here to always take the opportunity to tell your own story. Online, it's also how you present your experience. So, what are you really going to lean into in any given situation? And think about whether your story feels clear and cohesive. You don't have to tell everybody about every single thing you've ever done in an online bio, but we want those sort of mileposts, right? Like, first I did this, and then I did this, and we can talk about it in um, sort of chunks of time, but you want it to be clear how we got from point A to point B. Offline, your narrative is basically what is your response to tell me about yourself? And sometimes people have no idea what to say when somebody says, tell me about yourself. So it's worth thinking about what to say. It also alleviates a lot of pressure. If you have your little spiel kind of in the can and ready to go, it makes networking situations a lot less stressful because you know what you want to say. Thinking about how you explain your interests and your goals to other people in a way that makes sense. Thinking about the through line or the thread of your experience. So, what is something that unites this journey that you've been on? And very often, your beliefs and your values are a good way to show that cohesion. It's like, well, I believe in fairness. And so, I studied public health and then I got a job doing this or that. And now I have a job where I make sure that people have fair access to housing or to medical treatment. So, couching your experience in terms that people will really respond to and engage with. And so your narrative is about connecting the past and the future. So you're in a moment right now where you're holding those two pieces together. And so how you tell that really represents your narrative. And like I said, it can be really stressful when somebody walks up to you and says, "Tell me all about yourself." It's like, "Oh no, what should I say?" So just you can draft some answers, just have bullet points of things you want to talk about in different situations. I'm getting ready to go to a kind of a summit meeting on nutrition, and I'm not a nutritionist. And I typically don't work in the nutrition space. I do work with a food pantry. So I'm already thinking about how I'm going to answer all these questions from people who are nutritionists about who are you and what I'm doing at this particular meeting. So that's the N in brand is for narrative. And then finally, we bring it all home with design. So, thinking about your profile photos and visual consistency online, those things should reflect something about you as well. Um, I see another question in the chat, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Um, think about your resume portfolio and or your website design. So, for the students who are listening, or those of you who might be applying for jobs, every resume should be unique. It should be tailored to the job that you are applying for. Don't create one and think, whew, that's over with. Make sure that it makes it very clear how you are meeting this job's requirements. And we all know that there are AI screeners now for applications, so aligning the words on your resume with the words in the job posting is really not optional anymore. Think about formatting and layout or polish. That's why some of those tools like Wix and WordPress are really great because you don't have to be a graphic designer. Canva is another great tool if design is not your forte. And just think about the overall aesthetic and tone of your online presence. Is it reflecting, as my students say, the vibe or the aura that you want to achieve? Does it look like you? Um, you know, it would be strange if you pulled up like my faculty bio and it was all like hearts and rainbows, because if you know me, that's probably not what you would think. So you want to make sure that those design elements are not contradicting anything about your personal brand. And then offline, you might think, well, what do I have offline that reflects design? Well, your professionalism and your style, your body language and your presence, organization and attention to detail. It's basically the actual physical presentation of yourself. What materials you bring with you? What artifacts do you have with you? If you want people to think that you're sort of organized and together, you should look like you're organized and together, even if it's just a thin veneer. We've all had those days. Um, so really thinking about how your visual presence, what information that's conveying, because people see you first before they talk to you. And that might be one of the driving forces behind whether they talk to you or not. So just being intentional about that as well. All right, I'm going to pause here. So, a question in the chat. I'm switching careers. Can you give examples of how to transition, connect past experiences, focus on skills versus experience? Any job that you have, and this is good advice especially for the students on the call. Any experience you've had, there are probably transferable skills in that experience. So if you were like the fundraising chair of your sorority, but now you're applying for a job at the health department, you might say, well, what do those two things have to do with each other? Well, number one, being a good fundraiser is always a skill that is marketable. So you can think about those individual skills and say, I did this task for my sorority, but let me tell you how I would bring that skill into this new job or this new context. So again, it's all about telling that story, and not discounting any experience you've had. Another thing that I hear often from people, um, is about what counts as work and what doesn't. So I tell people don't think about work, think about experiences, think about skills, think about those nuggets of experience that are applicable in multiple situations. Um, and if you hit up against something that you've never done and you genuinely don't know how to do, first, never lie that you know how to do something, but make it clear that you are willing to learn. I had a friend who applied for a job that she was for sure not qualified for, but she got the job anyway. And so I was really perplexed because I was like, how did you get that job? Because you had to know a very specific software to get this particular job. And she said, I went on YouTube and I did all these tutorials about this software. And she was like, I actually learned it to the point that after she got the job, she knew more about it than some of the people who worked there because she had done all the tutorials and they hadn't. So the fact that she knew, like in the interview, she would be asked about those specific things and then went on YouTube to learn showed a lot of initiative. And they had no idea that she had never actually used the software. She just taught herself to prep for the interview. So I would you can focus on skills and experiences. I think, again, it's about how you tell the story and how you frame those skills. But that's a really good question, especially if you said you're switching careers. Yeah, if you're going from doing something that's like very unrelated, it is really important how you tell the story of those skills. Then there's one more here. Um, so I have a question from somebody who's in the medical device field and the advantages and disadvantages of promoting what is in process. So do you keep people up to date on milestones and things like that? Um, I think that it can be useful to talk about what's going on. I don't know that I would talk about results. Like we've cracked how to, stop necrotizing fasciitis. Unless you know for sure that you've done that, and then that's going to be a much bigger announcement. But you can always talk about the work without getting into specifics. Like, here's what we're working on. Here's what we're attempting to do. And talk about that it's exciting, that it's, revealing the challenges, that it's helping you, conceptualize these things in new ways, because all of that is true and all of that's happening. So it is a way to keep people interested in what you're doing and keeping them up to date without being wed to any particular outcome. So sometimes you can focus on process over results. And people do share news like that. If you're thinking about like a media relations sort of thing, people will say like, "Ooh, isn't it cool that they're working on this thing?" So I think that that's a possibility. In your situation, I would definitely check with your company's lawyers about any kind of post like that you make. Also, just um, because as a PR person at heart, I'm very often at odds with the legal advice around some things. So, any questions about the brand framework? So we're going to move on to media engagement or engaging professionally. Hmm. So we have a question in the chat about early career titles. Don't make it clear why I'm moving in a certain career direction. Um, so you were a health educator and now you're moving to consulting and program evaluation. Um, yeah, I think that you can play around with titles a little bit. I don't think it matters what your official title was, as long as you point out you're being honest about the skills and the experience. And job titles don't necessarily mean a lot. Job titles sometimes are very nebulous, and companies like to freestyle a little bit with what they call themselves or what they call certain titles to be creative. So I think that's fine, to to make the title you had on what shows up on a resume to make it more straightforward and reflective of the work that you did. Yeah, I think that's totally fine. All right, so let's talk about engaging professionally. So remember, we've said that professional you and personal you are not the same person, and that's okay. So, whenever we're being our professional selves on social media, we want to make sure that we maintain a positive digital footprint. So, you don't want to get into internet arguments with people. You don't want to create controversy for yourself or for your company. And I know that controversy visits us everywhere we go right now. Um, but you want to be mindful about what fights you're picking, I guess. Know and or create relevant policies. If you go to work for a company, find out what their social media policy is, and abide by it. If you go to work for a company that does not have a social media policy, I would really create one. I think it's incredibly important for organizations to have very clear social media policies about what you can and cannot post related to the work that you do. Um, Keep professional and private accounts separate. We talked about that. If you're in a situation where patient privacy or confidentiality are a factor, remember that that extends to the internet as well. You cannot identify a patient um, online just like you couldn't identify them in public. And then this one, do not provide medical advice online, and your lawyers will echo my sentiments. I did a presentation once for veterinary students and talked about this, and their professor said, "Oh, that's really good advice." And I was like, "Wait, you haven't already told them that?" Like for me, that's like medical school, vet school, any kind of healthcare professional first day of class is don't do that. Um, and for some professions, for maybe for some of you who are veterinarians, that line feels blurry because people are coming up to you in the grocery store, or you have friends who bring their pet to your practice and they're like, oh, Smudge, that's my parents' cat's name is Smudge. Smudge has the sniffles, and what do you think it is? Like, that is not a conversation for the grocery store. That is a conversation for your office. And get in the habit of setting those boundaries and redirecting people. If you have a friend who DMs you and says, do you think I have the flu? Here's what I look like, here's how I feel. That's not a conversation for social media. Um, you're inviting trouble that way, and I don't care how good a friend they are, it doesn't matter. Do not do that. Any questions about being a professional on social media? This is all incredibly common sense, but it's worth repeating. So, if we want to engage professionally on social media, be transparent and honest, engage respectfully, use disclaimers. So, if you are sharing information about, something that you do recommend, just say like, hey, this product has not been tried out in these situations or for these people. If you have questions, you need to follow up with, X, Y, or Z. Here's where you can get more information. So even those endorsements and recommendations need to be sort of give people the resources they need to find out more. Incorporate guidance from professional organizations. So another handout that I'm going to share at the end of today is from the American Public Health Association about leveraging social media. There are lots of good drafts of social media policies online that you can find and adapt to your needs. Um, so use those if you're thinking of creating a social media policy in particular. Think before you share. It's everybody's job to combat mis and disinformation. So make sure that anything that you reshare that is maybe going to be impactful for people, that you're sure of what you're sharing. Ask before you share, particularly in a work setting. So, um, anything in public you can share with no problem. Anything in private, though, especially if you're going to be sharing photos or videos in a promotional context, you do legally need the permission of the people included. Um, you can download a standard photo release online and it is legally binding. But basically, you can just fill it out and say, hey, we're planning to use this video at our job fair next week. Um, and if you're not okay with that, let us know. So you can be edited out of the video, or we can choose a different video that doesn't include you. So people have a right to say how their name, image, and likeness are used in promotional context. So respect the privacy of your employees. And if you're in any kind of client situation, always get their permission if especially if you're showing them and they can be identified. And remember that only people who can legally give consent can fill these out and it be binding. So if they would not legally be allowed to give a consent, they're a minor, they're incapacitated, other things, then you can't ask them to sign for themselves. And all of this is just a very wordy way of saying that if you ever question whether you are engaging professionally online, you can ask one simple question. Will this thing that I am about to post or say or do reflect positively on the profession? If the answer is no, you should really think twice. Because remember, it's not just about reflecting on your colleagues or on your organization. It's ultimately about reflecting on you as a professional. All you have is your professional reputation, and you should protect it. Any questions about personal branding or engaging professionally before we move on to media engagement? And that'll be the last section that we talk about, and then we'll have time for some questions. All right. Well, sometimes, social media is one thing, um, but traditional media is another. And sometimes we want a wider reach, and the traditional media still has much broader reach than you will ever have individually. And so, if you're a researcher or a practitioner and you want to know how do we get more eyes on our work, how do we get more people to know about our program, to participate in our programs, to find out about the work that we're doing, creating a media engagement strategy is a good idea. So we can use several strategies and we're going to talk about them in turn. So one is media relations. And so basically this is thinking about who do we want to engage with our work? Getting to know journalists or bloggers or podcast hosts or whoever that has reach with the people you're trying to reach. So who is engaging with that audience already? You don't have to get to the audience, you just have to get to the people they listen to. It's an old um, public opinion theory called two-step flow. It's like we don't have to reach everybody, we just have to reach the people that those people trust. So get to know those folks, who they are, what kind of content they're looking for, what are their deadlines, when are they generally posting or sharing content, and perfect your pitch. So what is the value proposition? What are you giving to them? Um, and so you're always going to usually think more highly of your work than other people do. I mean, that's just the nature of reality. So thinking about why would a journalist want to cover this story? What's in it for them? And making sure that you give them as many tools as they need to do their job. Journalists right now are having to do the job of several people. Reporters are having to write their own packages and take their own photos and shoot their own video. But wouldn't it be great if you could give them some of those things? So it's like, I'm giving you a story idea, but I will also provide a video. I will also line up an interview with our CEO. I will also give you a fact sheet or an infographic. That is adding value. And it really increases the likelihood that the reporter or whoever is going to reach back out to you because you're making their life easier. And the golden rule of media relations is to say yes a lot, a lot, a lot. Everybody wants to talk to a reporter when you want them to cover your stuff. But when they come to you and say, hey, this school district is about to ban sugary drinks in the cafeteria. Would you care to give me a comment? And you say, no, not really. Um, Again, that's not making their life easier. So if you're saying yes to them, it's going to make them feel nice about you and say yes to you. Also, for you to have the opportunity to talk about what you want to talk about, sometimes you have to talk about what other people want you to talk about too. So the more you say yes, the more your visibility increases and the more likely you are to get a call to talk about something you really care about. So be a good media relations citizen. So say yes in addition to asking people to say yes to you. A second strategy is to align your work with news values. We live and breathe the work that we do. We think it's the coolest thing ever, and it is. But other people don't feel that way. And people who decide what gets covered in the news are really only interested in things that are, in fact, news. And so if you're ever wondering how to pitch your story idea, it needs to fit one of the news values. And here are all the news values. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. And public health stories tend to line up nicely with some of these. But, make it clear to them like you need to write this story because this is something that's happening tomorrow. That's immediacy. You need to write this story because if people don't know about this disease outbreak, then lots of people are going to get sick. Magnitude. Um, well, consequence, not magnitude. Magnitude is an after the fact thing. Um, you need to write the story because people need to know how many people are without power after this hurricane. That's a magnitude story. And it goes on and on. So, making sure that you show them that you know what their challenges are. And it's like, yes, we've got this story about this cool thing that we're developing, but here's why it's news. So, again, understanding what their job is. And then self-promotion. This might be the one that comes the least naturally to people, but tell the stories of your work. Tell it every chance you get. Tell it on your social media platforms. Incorporate it into discussions like this. Um, Hone the message and adapt the outputs. So, whatever the overarching message is, we want everybody to get that message, but how they come to that message may look a little bit different. For some audiences, it might be through an Instagram reel. For other audiences, it might be a senior citizens day out in the park. How people uncover the messages that you have are really going to vary by audience. So, what we want to make sure is everybody gets the message, but we have to meet those audiences where they are. Social media in particular create what's called snackable content that's easy to share. People really like bite-sized bits of information. So if you have things that are bigger or longer form content, break those bad boys up. So take a longer video and make snippets. Take an infographic and present one panel at a time. Um, you know, use the content that you have. When you're creating content, it should be evergreen. So you shouldn't ever be putting a lot of effort into something that's going to be a one and done. Think about how you can recycle that content in lots of different ways. Promote the content on your own channel. So if you work for the health department and you created a really cool video, yes, it needs to go out on the health department socials, but people who work for the health department need to be sharing that too. Host or create events. Everybody loves a good event. And invite reporters, invite bloggers, invite the people you're trying to reach are engaging with so they can carry that message back. And then join professional organizations. You've already done that, things like Delta Omega, and a lot of organizations like this. I don't know specifically about Delta Omega, but a lot of organizations like this have a speakers bureau where you can sign up. You put your name, you put your credentials, you put some, topics that you talk about, and then you can be invited to give presentations like this. And it's a great way to incorporate your work and tell the stories of what you're doing and increase your reach. All right. So that's all I have for you today. I think we're pretty bang on actually in terms of time, but happy to answer questions. You guys have had some great questions already, but can be questions about anything we've talked about, or if there's something I didn't talk about that you thought you were going to hear, feel free to shout that out and I can see if we can chat about that for a minute.